Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? The Saints search for a new offensive coordinator rolls on, and it was Diana Rossini earlier today who had the report of the latest the latest Saints. Well, I'm saying LSU, the latest Saints candidate for OC, and it's Brian Johnson, the now former Eagles offensive coordinator. So here was the report earlier today from Diana Rossini. About 11:28 this morning. Former Eagles and offensive coordinator Brian Johnson spent the day with Cleveland yesterday. He meets with the Bucs next Monday and will interview for the vacant Saints offensive coordinator position per sources. So Diana Rossini had it first. A couple of things here on Brian Johnson, then sort of the big picture. It's interesting with Brian Johnson because he has mostly in his career been a college coach. And remember, Brian Johnson was an Urban Meyer guy at Utah. So Utah, coached at Utah, followed Dan Mullen to Florida and Mississippi State, spent 1 year at Houston as well. And then, after his tenure at Florida under Dan Mullen, he jumped into the NFL, where he's been the Eagles OC for the last 3 years. Now, it's interesting about Brian Johnson in Philly because he very clearly was the fall guy for the slide the Eagles took at the end of the season. They were in the Super Bowl a year ago. This year, Brian Johnson was quarterback's coach, working with Jalen Hurts. This year, he was promoted to offensive coordinator. And, I mean, the Eagles were one of the best teams in the NFL, and then they obviously faltered down the stretch. But this was an Eagles offense that finished 7th in scoring, 8th in total offense, had 2 1,000-yard receivers with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Jalen Hurts did have a career high in interceptions this season, but still was very effective throwing the football. His rushing numbers dropped a little bit this year. But it really felt like Nick Sirianni had to have a fall guy for the way things went south in Philly, and so Brian Johnson was that guy. I think Brian Johnson could be an excellent offensive coordinator. And he checks a lot of the boxes of what we've discussed. He turns 37 years old in February, so next month he'll be 37. So he's a young guy who has spent time in college, now 3 years in the NFL. He's been a quarterback's coach, an offensive coordinator. He played quarterback. He's part of my native language theory, right? This is all he knows is modern offense. It's all he's played and coached, 7-on-7, all that stuff his whole life. So if you have the list of Saints candidates and you draw the line down the middle, on one side you have all the young, innovative guys, and on the other sint you have the old retreads. It's like, well, what do you want? Do you want John Gruden or Mike Sullivan, or do you want Gerard Johnson or Clint Kubiak, Ronald Curry, Brian Johnson, someone along those lines? It's like which side of the ledger are you choosing from? It was interesting though because when you look back at Brian Johnson's career and you look at the quarterbacks he's worked with, there's a pretty common thread among all of them. At Utah, Mississippi State, Houston, Florida, and then in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles. Like when he was at Mississippi State, Dak Prescott was the quarterback. When he went to Houston, De'Aaron King was the quarterback. When he went to Florida, it was weird the first year because Felipe Franks was still there. And they had recruited Kyle Trask, but who they signed, remember, was Emory Jones, who then continued to play at like 5 different schools everywhere. It was really weird, the end of his career. And then he goes to the NFL, and he's got Jalen Hurts for 3 years. Do you understand, like, all of the offensive systems that Brian Johnson has functioned in as a coach, quarterback coach, coordinator, have been with mobile quarterbacks. Have had that element of the offense, the quarterback's ability to be a dynamic runner. That's not Derek Carr. So if you are, as the Saints organization, committed to Derek Carr as your quarterback, as it certainly appears they are, then I'm not so sure that Brian Johnson as your offensive coordinator makes the most sense, because he hasn't run offenses with quarterbacks that don't run. I mean, I'm looking here at Derek Carr's career statistics. The most rushing yards he's had in a season, forgive me, I had it. Here it is. The most rushing yards Derek Carr's had in a season is 40? No, I'm sorry. 140 yards. That's the most rushing yards Derek Carr has had in a season in his career. And that was in the COVID year in 2020. He ran 39 times for 140 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also a career high. My point is, Derek Carr ain't a runner. He's never been a runner, not going to be a runner. So if you have a quarterback or a coach who offensively, as he calls plays, has thrived with having a quarterback that can run, and you remove that element from the offense, what do you really have? So really with Brian Johnson, it's more of a question of, is Derek Carr going to be your guy? Because if he is, then it's hard to imagine why Brian Johnson would be the offensive coordinator. So if we look at the Saints candidates to date, let's start with kind of what we know. They interviewed Dan Pitcher, who's the Bengals quarterbacks coach. Well, he's off the board. Dan Pitcher was promoted to a Bengals offensive coordinator with their coordinator leaving. So Dan Pitcher's off the board. And then Shane Waldron is also off the board. So Shane Waldron was with Seahawks. Obviously, Pete Carroll out. Shane Waldron was a highly sought-after coordinator candidate. He took a job with the Bears. So those two are off the board. And then today, there's a lot of buzz around Zach Robinson of the Rams. And the reason a lot of people are talking about Zach Robinson today is Raheem Morris got the Atlanta Falcons job. So Raheem Morris was the defensive coordinator of the Rams, just got the Falcons head coaching job. And so a lot of the thought around the NFL is that Zach Robinson is going to go from LA to Atlanta with Raheem Morris and go be the Falcons offensive coordinator. So that's not done yet. Zach Robinson is still the quarterback's coach with the Rams, but the prevailing wisdom and thought around the league right now is that Robinson is going to go with Raheem Morris to Atlanta to be their offensive coordinator, so that would take Zach Robinson off the board. That means your candidates would be Gerard Johnson with the Texans, Brian Griese, Clint Kubiak with the Niners, Mike Sullivan with the Steelers, Ronald Curry, who's the in-house candidate with the Saints, and then Brian Johnson, who's set to interview next week. That would be 6. And then there's the candidates that some have maybe assumed could be candidates, but the Saints haven't formally interviewed, like John Gruden, for example. But known candidates who are still available that the Saints have either interviewed or have expressed interest in interviewing: Gerard Johnson, Brian Griese, Clint Kubiak, Mike Sullivan, Ronald Curry, Brian Johnson. That's your list as of now. And every day it seems like another name is added to the list, but for now it seems like it's going to be one of those 6, unless if the beat goes on and the search continues for the New Orleans Saints as they look for a replacement for Pete Carmichael Jr. Saints are trying to hire an offensive coordinator for the first time in almost 20 years. And for Dennis Allen, it's pretty clear. With the expectation on him, with the investment into Derek Carr, you got to get this right. So they're doing their due diligence. Brian Johnson, next up on the list for the Saints. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.